Can you walk a trail of tears that stretches 5,045 miles? It consists of overland passages and one main water route. It covers 9 U.S. states: Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Illinois, Kentucky, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. But what is it? The genocide that took place in the New World is not a novel topic, and it has plagued the modern inhabitants of the land for quite a long time. To understand the Trail of Tears, one should have a little bit of context. The New World had been populated way before its European exploration, making the idea that European explorers discovered it a preposterous one. After all, how can a place be discovered if it had already been populated by people? Columbus's expedition may have started the wave of Spanish expansion in the New World, but he was not the first European to set foot on the land. The Scandinavian seafarers had beaten him by roughly 500 years. Some accounts from the Norse sagas tell us that Leif Erikson was the first European to arrive in the Americas. However, some accounts attribute the European discovery to a man named Bjarni Herjolfsson, an Icelandic trader. The Norsemen did find the land to their liking, but realized that European spoils were far more accessible. When the Spaniards caught on to the idea of exploring and colonizing the American continent, the age of the Vikings was long gone. When the Spanish expansion started, they took over swaths of land. They faced resistance, but it was not very effective. The immune systems of the Native Americans had not faced the diseases of the Old World. Thus, diseases affected and killed most of the population. The rest had to face the music of the conquistadors. Not the sweet melodies of string instruments, the blaring sounds of rifles and a slicing throb of the European blade. The British, who were beginning their colonialist enterprises around the globe, joined in on the action and established colonies. These colonies revolted against their English overlords and formed the United States of America. The American land was promoted as the land of the free. The phrase, "the American dream," still holds. Meanwhile, in Europe, feudalism was starting to witness a decline. With the British and French peasants leading the way, class discrimination was becoming a serious challenge for the nobles and the bourgeoisie. Naturally, people wanted more upward mobility in a system that had never afforded them any. European land had been bought and paid for. With the discovery of a new continent, buying land suddenly became an affordable dream. The desperation for land boiled over in the American continent, where Europeans wanted to fight the natives tooth and nail to get their hands on it. It is important to contextualize the relationship between the natives and Europeans instead of reducing it to the natives good, Europeans bad stereotype. The situation in Europe drew the hatred of the Europeans toward the natives, who were holding all this land. This did not justify the prejudice, but it does help understand it from a sociological perspective. This prejudice manifested itself in the form of the removal and displacement of 5 native tribes, forcing them to flee from their inherited lands in the southeastern United States. In the early 19th century, the Native Americans in Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, North Carolina, and Florida numbered around 125,000. They had lived and farmed on that land for several generations, and they had controlled millions of acres of land in the region for a long time. The white settlers were not fond of this arrangement. They wanted the government to mediate a better deal for them with the natives. George Washington, Henry Knox, and some of the earlier major government figures believed in civilizing the natives. However, in European terms, civilizing has always reflected a bias towards the opposing cultures. Just like the Scandinavians were savages to the Romans, the Native Americans were alien and hostile to the American settlers. A quote by Old Tassel, the chief of the Salagi, reflects the other side of the equation. Many proposals have been made to us to adopt your laws, your religion, your manners, and your customs. We would be better pleased with beholding the good effects of these doctrines in your own practices than with hearing you talk about them. The American settlers wanted them to learn and understand English. They wanted them to adopt Christianity, just like so many colonies worldwide. Some factions of society wanted to impose the Western models of life, economic and social, on the natives. Others wanted a less stern approach. The 5 tribes were willing to engage in the process of integration to a respectable degree. These tribes included the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Muskogee, and Seminole. They wanted to come around to the European way of land ownership and other economic practices. Regardless, they would be forced to leave their land and relocate in the 19th century. This displacement can be traced back to the British Proclamation of 1763, which allocated the land between the Mississippi River and the Appalachian Mountains for the Native Americans. They named it the Indian Territory. It was designated to protect the minority, but the settlers kept trespassing and encroaching on the land. The land race meant that if people wanted land, even if it was illegal for them to occupy, they would take it. The settlers wanted to grow cotton on the land and would resort to violent means to do it. Murder, arson, and pillaging were becoming common by the day. The governments, first the British and later the United States, did not intervene to nullify this infringement of property. The decisive moment arrived in 1829. In Dahlonega, Georgia, a gold rush was underway. People wanted to own land and lay the foundations for vast enterprises. This was right around the time when work intensified on the first American railroads. The Georgian mines, located on Cherokee land, were worth a lot. Looking at the capital interests in the region, political forces started to come around to the idea of taking over the land. Factions of the public mounted pressure on Congress to allow the states to take care of the issue. Congress passed the Indian Removal Act, which gave the natives an opportunity to negotiate their lands and move west of the Mississippi, with $500,000 to help cover transportation costs. The newly appointed President Andrew Jackson gave his full support to the idea in the following words during his second annual message to Congress in 1830. It gives me pleasure to announce to Congress that the benevolent policy of the government, steadily pursued for nearly 30 years, in relation to the removal of the Indians beyond the white settlements, is approaching to a happy consummation. Two important tribes have accepted the provision made for their removal at the last session of Congress, and it is believed that their example will induce the remaining tribes also to seek the same obvious advantages. The natives in the Southeast had an agricultural community. After farming for centuries in the region, the indigenous people had figured out the best practices. They had chosen the land because it existed in a prime location for cultivation, and the immigrant American populace wanted these lands. And with momentum on their side, the land was ripe for the picking. They started laying the foundations of infrastructure and waited with bated breath. The tribes, the Choctaw, Creek, Chickasaw, Cherokee, and Seminole, wanted to negotiate with the government to the best of their ability. The Choctaw were the first tribe that finalized negotiations in 1830. They gave their land away and got ready for transportation. Red tape and a general lack of interest on the part of the U.S. government meant that appropriate conditions were not in place for the move. On top of that, they had to move farming equipment and livestock, which did not make their job any easier. Without ample arrangements and discipline, the relocation was sure to go awry. At the end of the day, the Choctaw suffered in the worst possible way. Most people of the indigenous tribe died from malnutrition, exhaustion, and disease. After the fateful journey of the Choctaw, the other tribes did not feel overzealous to join them. Nevertheless, in 1832, the Chickasaw and the Creek finalized their agreement. The Creek were working at their pace, but the new settlers were not having it. Some of them decided to move in earlier than they should have. They started settling down, which led to further conflicts. After a multitude of delays, further exaggerated because of the confusion, the Creek headed out in 1836. Unfortunately, they suffered the same fate as the Choctaw. Out of the 15,000 Creeks who initially left, 3,500 died during the trip. In order not to fall prey to the ills that befell their fellow tribes, the Chickasaw learned a couple of things from the Euro-American settlers. They sold their land and belongings at a good margin and managed to make arrangements for their migration. They finally moved out in 1837 and completed their journey with the least number of problems relative to the other tribes. The Seminole also finalized an agreement in the same year as the other three. In their case, the state's ineptitude was so overwhelming that it surpassed the failures of the other three cases. The fact that several Seminole individuals felt shortchanged did not help matters at all. The Seminole people claimed that the signatories had no right to represent them and did not have their best interests at heart. On the one hand, the U.S. government wanted to resolve matters as quickly as possible. On the other hand, the Seminole felt that they got the short end of the stick. Things escalated beyond litigation, and violence ensued. In the aftermath of the Second Seminole War, many indigenous people eluded the authorities and chose to remain in the region. Finally, let's talk about the Cherokees. They refused to leave their land and resisted any offers from the U.S. government. The Cherokees finally agreed to leave and negotiated a deal, but it was controversial among the Cherokee community, who considered it a disrespectful move. Just like in the case of the Seminole, the authorities decided to use brute force and force the Cherokees out. The Cherokees faced all the issues that overcame the other tribes on their journey: hunger, mistreatment, and widespread diseases. Almost 15,000 Cherokees had left, out of which 4,000 died. The deadly journey that these tribes undertook is known as the Trail of Tears, an arduous journey for the Native Americans. It is remembered today for the horror of the long trip that claimed so many lives. The resilient men, women, and children of the 5 tribes managed to get to the Mississippi River, even if in small numbers. As we appreciate the courage of these great people, let us not forget the cruelties and use of force exercised by the other side. In the words of the celebrated author Neil Gaiman, U.S. troops forced every one of them they could find and catch to walk over 1,000 miles to the new Indian territories in what would one day be Oklahoma, down the Trail of Tears, a cheerful gesture of casual genocide. Thousands of men, women, and children died on the way. When you've won, you've won. To learn more about the cruel history of the Trail of Tears, check out our book, Trail of Tears, a captivating guide to the forced removal of Cherokee, Muskogee, Creek, Seminole, Chickasaw, and Choctaw nations. It's available as an ebook, paperback, and audiobook. Also, grab your free Mythology Bundle ebook while it's still available. All links are in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this.